From the moment we stepped out the gate on that day, we was completely firing on all cylinders, from the point of explosion to conducting the CASEVAC to the moment at the HLS to being back at CP Malvern and listening to the Sergeant Major's speech. We didn't really get a time to have a breather and acknowledge what had actually happened until we got back to PB Clifton. And that moment first came for the lads when we was at the unloading bay. So when I unloaded the lads, as soon as they got unloaded, they unloaded, and then that was their moment, you know. As soon as that happened, they kind of like started acknowledging it between each other. But I never got to share that moment with them. I got pulled away straight away to go and give a full debrief, so that wasn't there for me. I never got to be there for that. So I went away and gave that full debrief, and it wasn't until after that debrief that felt like I needed to go and get some space and kind of acknowledge it and get that space for myself. So I went back to my tent and dropped all my shit off back inside the multiple tent, you know, like a 14-man big 12x12. And then I felt like I just wanted to go for a walk, but there is nowhere to go for a walk in Afghan, you know. So I went to the toilets, but anybody that's obviously been there will tell you that when you sit inside the toilet in Afghan, it's fucking just like a little hot box. It's almost just like a little human air fryer, you know. So by that time, the lads, all the other lads had started coming back from CP Malvern on the next trips on the Mastiffs. So there was no time to like really take that time to myself, and then that never really came for me until that night on the HLS. And when I sat on the HLS, you know, I kind of just sat there looking at the stars, thinking about Jay, but I felt like just so numb. I felt like in such disbelief, and not just in like disbelief at what had happened, but like disbelief that Jay was alive, because shortly, obviously before this time, Sergeant Major had told us that he was in an induced coma and that he was alive, but I was just in complete disbelief because the last time I had seen him was in that moment when we was face to face at the HLS. So for me, it was like it was just so hard for me to believe that he was actually alive. And I would sit there just going over my decisions that I made on that day. I was going over like my radio transmissions and just questioning everything, making sure like, was I right, was I wrong, like why did this happen, etc. And that kind of carried on for a few days, but only in the evenings when I took that time to myself. Other than that, it was like I really did bury it deep and really did just try and get on with things and not let it affect me at all. It was only when I purposely gave it that time in the evenings to try and like fucking think about it, you know. But one thing that I kind of like always held on to was a few days after, well, on the day when we got back to PB Clifton, Jonesy, the TA lad, so Jay got blown up, and then when I ran around the corner, Jonesy was already in the ditch putting double tourniquets on Jay and giving him morphine. Now, obviously, Jay got blown up and he formed a crater, so when Jonesy was in the ditch, he was full of blood, so Jonesy's clothes ended up getting covered in blood, and Jonesy said to me, what should I do with my clothes? And I told him, he was going to chuck them away. I said, don't chuck them away, just bag them up, and then we'll give them to the CQ and exchange them, because they'll end up probably charging you for them. So he did bag them up, but then a few days later, he come up to me and he said, like, what should I do with that bag, mate? It's still under my bed, and he couldn't stop thinking about it, and I just like, you know, I just felt like a proper shit bag for that, and I still did for so many years, especially later in the years, like later in like 5-6 years later, when most of us were struggling with what happened that day, and I knew Jonesy would have been struggling with that exact moment, having those clothes under his bed, and I kind of like felt responsible, and I still do kind of feel responsible for that. It was on me. But yeah, it's just something that I held on to. And when it comes to like not talking about it to anybody, it was like when me and Matt Sampson were in the gym, Lance Corporal Matt Sampson, he was another lad that was on, another TA lad that was actually on the patrol with us. He obviously had his problems with like what he struggled with, and he said to me in the gym, and I said to him, I actually said the words to him, mate, you can't show anybody, you can't show the lads that we're struggling, we just have to crack on with it. We can't show them that. And he just said, yeah, I get that, mate. And then we buried it and we cracked on, you know, and then we're going out on a deliberate op a few days later. So to me, at the time, that felt like what resilience was, and that's what resilience was to me the whole time, is how I felt like we had to carry on with it. We just buried it, we got on with it, we didn't speak about it. And from those moments there, I think all of us did bury it, and we didn't speak about it for years, and that was just simply because of how we did view resilience and how we did think we had to deal with it. And it's only through my struggles and only going through those years of struggle later on that I kind of had to like, realising that didn't work anymore, and I was no longer resilient. So then later now, like my views on resilience is completely changed, and how I achieve resilience is completely different. Like we train so much physically for physical resilience, like when it comes to like in the military every single day, you know, like for the stretcher race, like we'd trained for that so much. We'd done countless stretcher races in the most realistic scenarios as possible that we could in training, especially in pre-deployment, you know. But there's nothing really to train us for the mental side of things other than just bury it, which has always just been part of, especially the British culture. It's just been like bury it deep and just get on with it, don't talk about it. But like I said, that only worked so long for me, and it was like years later that it kind of like crept up and it was no longer able to just bury it. So resilience for me became like was only achieved through vulnerability. And by vulnerability, I mean like just by talking about my stuff. And that was through, I kind of had like this idea, I explained it before, like we have like this mental garage, and everybody's got this mental garage, and everybody's got like a different sized one. So like someone's got like a double garage, someone's got like a small garage, some have a garden shed, some have a bloody factory, you know, it's all different for individuals. But as we go through our life, like, and we deal with like these big occasions, like so these big traumatic events which end up in these big boxes, but then we have those small daily basis things that we don't really deal with, and we just put them in those small boxes and we put them away in that garage. And as we say, that garage is only so full. It doesn't matter how big a garage is, it will eventually get full. And it kind of comes in stages, because as the garage kind of like starts to get full, we go through like what is coping, you know, like the coping stage. And when we're going through that coping stage, we have to like kind of like we don't really realise it, but we definitely feel it. It's when we feel stressed, you know, and then you have to ask yourself, like, how is it actually affecting you as a person? How is it affecting you as a family man, or like how is it affecting you as a dad, as a brother, as a sister, as a mum, you know? And then how is it affecting your performance in daily life? How is it affecting your performance at work, etc.? And that's only like as it starts to get full. And I think a lot of people kind of like tend to like live in this stage without dealing with any of their problems. And then eventually like we don't deal with it. And if you don't deal with any of those boxes and you don't start unpacking it, it eventually gets full. And then when it gets full, that's when we see people at their breaking point. And nobody really wants to see themselves at their breaking point, because they're not too sure what that looks like. Because if you do get there, it's kind of like, that's when you either, if you haven't yet seen therapy, you're either going to go and get therapy, or unfortunately you're going to end up taking your own life, because that's when it becomes like you can no longer deal with it, because you have not got the emotional or mental bandwidth to deal with anything that's going on in the daytime. That's when like your back garage is completely full. And like for me, it was like my garage was completely full. I wasn't dealing with my shit, and something so small like the bin bag would break, and it would just be like a massive big ball of rage that would just come firing out at me. And that's because I just had nothing. I couldn't even deal with the smaller little boxes in the daytime, let alone these big traumatic events. So for me, it was always like, how do I achieve a sustainable, healthy resilience? You know, and for me, that was through vulnerability. And vulnerability is always just seen as like this, being like defenseless and weak, or like just exposed and open to attack. And it is obviously that's the definition of it. But it's only through like vulnerability and opening those boxes and starting to process boxes that we can actually start dealing with it and emptying the garage, and then we can start becoming like a sustainable, resilient person. We can start operating at a half decent level, higher than what we normally can, because we're not getting brought down by all that weight that we're carrying on on a daily basis. And for a lot of people that can be like mad scary, you know. For me it was, I didn't want to go and talk to anybody about my stuff. I didn't want to tell anybody about anything, but it was only through like starting to unpack the smaller boxes. It doesn't have to be those big traumatic boxes, but you can only start unpacking those smaller boxes, and you don't even have to start unpacking them. You can take a step back and become like the watcher of the garage, you know. It starts with having a look in and saying, what boxes are in there? How full is it? What size are they, you know? And is there any in there that I am prepared to start dealing with? And if there is, then there's professionals out there that can actually help you, you know. Like it's a massive world, and you start going down the mental health route, and you know, and you start trying to deal with these kind of things on your own. You don't have to deal with it on your own. There's professionals out there that can help you with it, you know. And the reason why like I kind of like look back at that to the few days after when Jay got blown up was because my views on like how resilience is achieved now, rather than telling the lads to just telling Matt to just bury it deep and not show anybody that he's struggling, to me now is like kind of like terrible, you know. But if I could go back now and change that, then maybe in that moment in that gym, then I would have said, yeah, mate, I'm struggling too. You know, I had these terrible moments at the HLS, and you know, it's not telling him emotionally, you're not breaking down crying, but you're just telling him like, yeah, fucking hell, mate, I had a bad moment at the HLS with him. And maybe Matt would have gone, yeah, mate, to be honest with me, I feel like I didn't help you enough, and I saw some terrible things on that final sweep, and you know, which he really did, and I didn't find out until many years later, because I didn't have these conversations with him. And there was nothing stopping me going back into that tent, and maybe not going to the lads and saying, oh lads, this happened to me, you know, but at least going back into that tent and maybe being like, all right, gents, that was a fucking terrible day, real terrible experience, but you know, what we're thinking about, you know, what's your version of events, and just going through that there and then. And I know everyone that goes through these kind of experiences doesn't do that, and well, not everybody. I'm sure there's guys out there that have got that experience. I was just a 20-year-old lad, you know, at the time, so I definitely didn't have that life experience. Yeah, I could manage it as a soldier, but when it comes to that life experience and like what I know now, and going into that tent and doing that would have been, you know, much more ideal, and maybe it would have saved like so many more years of pain from the guys, because that would have been the start of the processing time, you know, of highlighting, oh yeah, this happened to me on that patrol, that was my personal experience, and it was fucking terrible, you know, and then we're all aware of it, rather than the 3 3 a.m. phone calls in like 2015, 2016, like 5-6 years later, when the lads are phoning me and then, you know, drunk at 3 a.m. in the morning telling me those stories, and then I'm pretending like I'm not sat in my lounge doing the exact same thing. But I didn't phone them at that time, because for me it was like, I felt like if they'd seen that I was struggling, then, you know, they'd be like even worse. And for me it was, I phoned Gaz Pamphlet, who was my, if you didn't listen to my earlier episodes, Gaz Pamphlet was my corporal when I first joined up to battalion. And I phoned him because in my mind it was like, that was a man of experience, and I looked up to him as a soldier and as a man, and I knew that he had been through multiple tours beforehand, and I knew he'd been through similar experiences, not only on his tours before, but also when he was in Afghanistan with Tom Lake. And so for me it was like, I was trying to like phone somebody with that experience, thinking like, has he got those answers to like, how can I stop thinking about this, you know? But, and the lads were doing that to me at the same time. But it's just one big circle, rather than us actually just opening up about it and creating that conversation loop and just making it a normal conversation, as opposed to being like, picturing it being like laying on bed and crying your heart out to somebody. It's not. It's just acknowledging that it's there and taking that power away from it, because as soon as you acknowledge it, I really do feel like that power just disappears from it. Not completely, but you have more control of it and what you can do with it. Yeah, sometimes it does get out of control and they still pop up every now and then, but the more you get used to having a look at what's in that garage and saying, yeah, this is affecting me, then the better you get at doing it. Therapy's a skill, it's a conversation at the end of the day, self-reflection, introspection, and if you don't practice it and you don't carry on trying to do it, then you're never going to get good at it, and it'll always be this big daunting thing of opening a box and you know, having a look at yourself in a psychological mirror. But yeah, thank you very much, guys, and I'll see you next week. Bus.